If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be sitting here, sipping lukewarm coffee in my sunroom, confessing a secret chapter of my life to strangers on the internet, I would have laughed. Not just any laugh, the kind you let out when life feels predictable, safe, even boring. The kind of laugh that comes from believing you know exactly how your story will play out. But life has a way of humbling us, of reminding us that even after decades, surprises can still come knocking. My name is Elaine Carter. I'm 62 years old, married to my husband, Richard, for nearly 40 years. Together, we raised 3 children who are now grown, with families of their own. We have 4 grandchildren who light up our holidays, and a house that feels far too big and far too quiet most days. Our marriage isn't unhappy, not exactly. But after so many years, it shifted. The wild passion of youth became the steady companionship of middle age, and eventually, that companionship became something quieter still. Polite. Predictable. Sometimes, it feels like Richard and I are 2 people occupying the same space, moving in parallel lines that rarely intersect. Richard isn't cruel, not in the slightest. He's a good man. But he's always been busy, occupied, with his business, his clients, his phone. I can't remember the last time he really looked at me, really saw me. And somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting him to. 2 years ago, after Richard's second knee surgery, he admitted that driving long distances was becoming difficult. That's when we hired Jerome Harris, a quiet, soft-spoken man in his 40s. At first, it was a simple arrangement. He drove Richard to meetings, appointments, and occasionally me to errands. He was punctual, respectful, and almost invisible in his silence. For months, we hardly exchanged more than a polite hello. He'd nod, open the car door, and drive. But one crisp October morning, something shifted. The sidewalks were covered in gold leaves, and I had just come from the salon with a haircut I wasn't sure about. As I slid into the back seat, Jerome glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said softly, "Looks nice." 2 words. That's all. But they lingered with me longer than they should have. Because for the first time in years, someone noticed. Someone looked at me, really looked. From that day forward, our conversations grew. First, it was about the weather. Then books. Music. Childhood memories. He'd ask how my day had been, and he actually listened when I answered. His eyes didn't dart back to a phone screen. He didn't nod absently. He listened like my words mattered. And that was something I hadn't felt in so long. One evening, after I'd attended a small art gallery by myself, I slipped into the car feeling heavy with loneliness. Jerome glanced at me and asked gently, "You okay, Elaine?" "I'm fine," I lied, staring out the window. "Just tired." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You carry tired beautifully." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't slick or rehearsed. It was something else entirely. Tenderness. A kind of human warmth I hadn't felt in decades. That night, lying beside Richard as the blue glow of the television flickered across the room, I thought about Jerome's words. Not with guilt, not with shame, but with an ache. The kind that reminds you how long you've been unseen. Nothing physical ever happened between us. No stolen kisses. No secret meetings in dark corners. But the intimacy of our words, the quiet attention, became its own kind of connection. A dangerous one, perhaps, but undeniable. He told me about his childhood near the river, about his mother who still called every Sunday. I told him about my garden, about how I used to paint before motherhood consumed me. With Jerome, I wasn't just Richard's wife, or a grandmother, or a woman fading into the background. With him, I was Elaine again. Thanksgiving came. The house was filled with family, laughter, and the smell of turkey roasting. But Richard, as always, was distracted. He arrived late, slipped into his seat, and scrolled through emails while I passed him the cranberry sauce. By the time dessert came, he was already on another call. That night, I sat in the kitchen alone, staring at an untouched pie, my heart heavier than I wanted to admit. Almost without thinking, I picked up my phone and texted Jerome, "Hope your day was peaceful." He replied quickly, "Quiet. Thought of you when I passed the lake. The trees were your color today." That line, it unraveled something inside me. No one had spoken to me like that in years. Not Richard. Not anyone. The following week, I asked Jerome to drive me to that very lake. He parked and waited in the car while I sat by the water, wrapped in my coat, watching the ripples shift with the wind. When I returned, he didn't ask questions. He simply said, "You don't have to say anything, Elaine. I get it." And I believed him. He did get it. Christmas came, wrapped in its usual ribbons and routines. Richard handed me a necklace I'd admired in a store window months before. It was beautiful. Perfect, even. But when I opened the box, I felt nothing. It was a gift chosen out of obligation, checked off a list. That night, as he watched football in the living room, I closed myself in the bedroom and messaged Jerome, "Thank you for seeing me." His reply came minutes later, "You deserve to be seen." We never crossed the physical line. But emotionally, we built a quiet world of our own, one where words became lifelines. And in that world, I began to change. I started painting again. Just small watercolors, but it felt like waking up an old part of myself. I walked more, breathed more deeply. I called my sister, we hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Slowly, I began reclaiming pieces of the woman I used to be, before I became invisible in my own life. Jerome didn't save me, but in a way, he reminded me I was still worth saving. That chapter is closed now. He still drives Richard sometimes. When we see each other, it's polite, distant, as though none of it ever happened. And maybe that's for the best. But I'll never forget it. Because for a little while, in the quiet space between words, someone looked at me and reminded me that I was still here. And that changed everything.